If you play live cash games where there's an active straddle a decent chunk of the time, you may have had a question very similar to one that was posed on the Redship Discord the other day. So this post was from Triple S, who says, "We have this guy in our 1-3 game who likes the button straddle to be on, so occasionally when someone refuses to put the button straddle on, he pays it for them. I know this is a rare and silly situation, but the other day he paid for my button straddle, small blind raised to 20, and 3 people called. With what range should I be closing the action? Thanks." So while the specifics of this question might be a little bit unique, the overall question is essentially, hey, I'm in a straddle pot, what should I be closing action with, especially after there's a raise and multiple callers? Not an uncommon thing, especially in a live cash game straddle pot. Now, whenever I'm trying to answer a question that has to do with preflop ranges, the first place I start is the app. Now, when you open the app, and I'll leave a link for it in the description box if you don't already have it, you can go over to full ring cash ranges. We're talking about a button straddle situation, so we'll click that right here, and we will go through. And by the way, you do need to have a fully unlocked app in order to access these ranges. The free version or the unpaid version is only going to have access to the open raising ranges, so just keep that in mind. If you're like, why I don't have access to this, that would be why. So what is the exact situation we have? Well, we don't know the exact positions that Triple S is dealing with in this spot, but we do know that the button straddle is on the small blind open to 20 based upon the question. We don't know exactly who called, but let's just assume that under the gun called and the low jack called, and we're talking about the button. Now you might be like, well, the specifics said that there were 3 callers to hero. Well, totally fair, but based upon the game tree of this particular solve, only 3 max callers were allowed, including the button player closing action in a given situation, so it doesn't matter if the low jack called and MP called. Again, you can only have 3 callers based upon the game tree. Whenever you're setting up or doing a preflop solve, the more preflop callers you allow, the more and more complicated the overall solve is going to get, and at some point it just becomes too egregious. It'll take way too long, be way too expensive, and usually for something that's not super useful. So again, this will get us in the ballpark. But one of the things that I'm really looking for just to get started, because again, this isn't exactly perfect to the situation, but it's definitely in a ballpark. One of the things we can do is say, okay, let's just say, again, under the gun called, low jack called. What is the calling range from the button? Well, we click that right there. We're talking about roughly 1% of hands, right? Ace king suited, a little bit of ace king off, a little bit of pocket queens, 3s and deuces for whatever reason get about half inclusion, and then everything else is going to either get folded or 3-bet. And that is also one of the things you should be doing when you're poking around and you're, again, analyzing a spot like this or trying to answer a question like this between sessions, is not just looking at the exact thing you want to look at, which is the button calling action, closing action, but also what's the 3-bet, right? So while the button call here is 1% of hands roughly, the 3-bet is what? Another 3% of hands. And that's of course where all the other stuff that you would expect, like jacks and aces and all that, is going to be found. And of course very minimal inclusion here because the solver was preferring to put ace king suited into the calling range for the button, again closing action in this specific spot. Now if we go back and just look at again the basic question that was asked, which is what should we be calling with in this situation, the solver of course does not like calling very often, and this is a lot tighter than the average live player would call closing action in this given spot. So one of the things I do here is say, okay, well this is pretty atypical and definitely not what players in my game are anywhere near using. That's a good starting point. And then I say, okay, well why might the solver be doing this? So one of the things that you can do in this given situation is you can say, okay, if you click done, it gives you the entire spot, which is very helpful. And then I go through and I look at every single person that's involved in this situation. So small blind open is roughly 11% of hands. And the first thing I do is to say, okay, does this represent the small blind in this given situation, right? Is the small blind someone who's likely to just complete with pocket 8s, pocket 9s, pocket 10s, jack 10 suited, all that kind of fun stuff from the small blind, or are they more likely to open it? I think in a normal live game, this is actually a lot wider than people would typically open from the small blind in a button straddle situation. So I think this is probably a little bit tighter in real time. Again, totally villain dependent though. There are some players where the range might actually be closer to 20% of hands. So keep that in mind. The next thing I do is I look at the other players. And one of the things you're noticing is very tight calling percentages from these players, right? This is under the gun against the small blind open, 0.1% of hands. This is the low jack, 0.9% of hands after under the gun calls. So we're talking about very tight calling ranges. again, is that representative of the players you're playing against in this given situation, or are they likely calling with maybe 10, 15, 20% of hands, which is very common in a live game? So when we finally work our way over to what the solver wants the button to be calling with in the spot, again, 0.8% of hands, I'd say this is not really representative of the given spot you're likely in, unless you're playing a game where the small blind is actually raising roughly 11% of hands and the other players are extremely, extremely tight in their calling ranges. If you're in a spot where the small blind is opening roughly the same and both under the gun and the low jack are calling quite a bit more, then you're probably in a spot where squeezing makes a tremendous amount of sense. You can call with some of the hands you don't really want to squeeze with, maybe some suited connectors or pocket pairs that you think play a little bit more valuable as set mines, but a lot of the time there's a ton of hands you can be throwing into your squeeze range here, and I'm actually much more interested in squeezing here as opposed to looking for more hands to call with. I know you can call with some hands, again, the speculative stuff that you're like, I don't really want to squeeze this and blow out anything, fine, but honestly, in situations like this, even if the small blind opens half as often as the solver is suggesting here, if they would ever consider folding hands like ace queen, even some ace kings against your squeeze, that's very, very, very valuable for you. And again, the average person who's going to call here from under the gun or the low jack or just any other situation or position here based upon, again, the exact configuration of the hand, if they have much, much wider ranges, chances are they're going to fold a lot to a squeeze. Again, if they had a hand that was worth kind of sticking around in a 3-bet pot with, wouldn't they likely have just 3-bet themselves? Most likely. And because the person in this hand is paying for your button straddle, they probably don't view you as particularly active, and as such, you can probably get away with a ton of extra squeezing and generate a bunch of extra folds. If that's the situation you're in, squeeze more, worry less about what to call with closing action here. So hopefully that helps you understand kind of my process for figuring out some ranges and again studying these spots between sessions. That way in real time you have a much better idea on what to look for. The other thing, just because I can't help myself, I have to talk about this for at least a moment, is this is obviously a very unique setup, right, where you have someone who's paying for button straddles and really likes the button straddle to be on. So one of the things I would think about with that person is understanding who they are, right, that person who would even consider paying for someone else's button straddle. If they are a whale and they just really love the button straddle to be on, then I think you should not be allowing them to pay for it. You should just be button straddling with them, keeping them as happy as possible, and going forward from there. If they are an impatient reg or there's someone who plays a level higher and is just, they're a reg there and they're just playing down for whatever reason, waiting for a spot to open, whatever, then fine, do what you want to do. But if they're a whale or super, super fishy and it makes a lot of sense to just keep them happy, pay for your button straddle a decent chunk of the time and just keep them as happy as possible, sticking around as long as possible. You don't want them to feel like the game is super nitty and just all of a sudden say, F it, I'm gone, right? Keep them happy, keep them active. That's going to be much, much better than, generating a free $6 straddle off them here and there. So I couldn't help myself. I had to add that in here just in case you find yourself in weird spots like this ever again. But anyway, that's going to wrap it for this one. Thank you so much for hanging out today. Thank you, Triple S, for asking this question, and hopefully this helps. If you have your own comments or questions, make sure to join the Discord today, redchippoker.com/Discord. Join on in, ask any questions you have over there. Excellent, excellent community, over 6,000 players talking poker 24/7. And just for the record, if you like the app as well, you can also get that redchippoker.com/app, or just look for the GTO Ranges app in your app store of choice. But again, that's going to wrap it. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, please make sure to like the video, and I'll see you back shortly with a brand new one. In the meantime, good luck out there, and happy grinding.